Cool. Right. I'm going to start off with a question. Have you ever arrived at a place, and when you got there and you arrived, from like the deepest part of your being, you just went, oh yes. Like, oh yes. It would be the moment you arrive on that holiday location, maybe that hotel with that balcony looking over the sea, or that lovely cottage in the middle of nowhere. Or maybe it's a new home, a new job, and this realization hits that this is where you're staying now. You think, oh yes, I was made for this. My friends will make fun of me for bringing this up, but a few years ago, I spent a year living in Cape Town, South Africa. And I remember arriving into what was their summer, leaving from our winter. And about a few weeks in, I found myself sitting in a swimming pool at a friend's house, nice cold drink, 30 plus degree heat, pushing 40. And I remember thinking to myself, oh yes, like, is this what I get to call home for a year? Wow. Perhaps you can think of a similar feeling in regards to meeting a person, where you've got to know them and you almost find a home in being with them and you think, oh yes. Keep that image in mind as you read today's passage, which is from Revelation chapter 21, verses 1 to 5. So you may wish to find it in your Bibles or on your phones now. It should be on the screen. Just a bit of context, for the context of the passage. The book of Revelation is at the very end of the Bible. It's a vision to a man called John. And it shows many, many things. One of them is it shows the end of this war between good and evil, how it's going to end, and the culminating story of the Bible. It has a lot of imagery in it, which is hard to understand without a good understanding of the Old Testament. I can't profess to have a good understanding of the Old Testament, but I've done my research for this. So if you're new to reading the Bible, or I wouldn't start with Revelation, but there are plenty of resources online if you do feel ready to go for it. It's an incredible book, but one that certainly requires like a key to go with it. And that's, there's plenty of stuff online for that. So let's read the passage. A new heaven and a new earth. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. Is it on the screen? No, okay. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there is no longer any sea. I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice coming from the throne saying, look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death, or mourning, or crying, or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. He who is seated on the throne said, I am making everything new. Then he said, write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true. Now, some passages in the Bible, you read them and they require a bit of unlocking, a bit of understanding, and then suddenly the encouragement in them is there. However, this passage, although there's a lot to dig in and find more and more of, on the surface, it's still pretty stunning, isn't it? It's just a lovely passage. It's one of the most hopeful passages in the Bible. I think, oh yes, is the kind of response I get when I read this. And I think the worst response you possibly could have is, well, that sounds pretty nice to be fair. It's probably the worst you're going to get. Whether it's talking about God's dwelling place being with his people, or wiping every tear from their eyes, no more death, fear, mourning, crying, or pain. This passage is glorious. A summary of this talk could read something like this, and this is probably a bit representative of the week I've sort of had when I'm preparing this, so it might sound a little bit gloomy, but I'll make sense of it later. But if you want to summarize what I'm going to say off the get-go, it would be the light at the end of the tunnel is now spreading through the tunnel. That would be the summary of today's talk. We'll be looking at 3 points. The first one, we'll be looking at the end of evil. Secondly, we'll be looking at the removal of pain. Third, the difference it makes now. So let's go. The end of evil. So one of the things you may have picked up in this passage is that it doesn't seem to bode well if you are a lover of going to the beach or a lover of swimming in the sea. A lot of these descriptions, they make sense, right? No more pain, death, evil, like, great, cool. What did the sea do wrong for it not to be there? This is an example, I think, of that Old Testament understanding being required, because the sea and waters mentioned in the Old Testament, it comes up quite a lot, often have negative connotations. If we go all the way back to the opposite end of the Bible, to Genesis 1, we read that, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty, and darkness was over the surface of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters." The Hebrew word for water used here is the word tehom, which translates to deep or abyss. Is used to describe things like the floodwaters in Genesis. Is used to describe what the Israelites escaped through and the Egyptians were buried under in Exodus. In Genesis 1, this description of this sort of pre-creation water is often referred to as chaos. Now, this isn't chaos as in like the playground you may find at a school. I work at a school and I've had to do a few break duties with like the year one kids. That feels like chaos. It's not that kind of chaos. A better understanding of this word of chaos would be a lack of order or harmony. No order, no harmony. It's basically saying that nothing can work here. Nothing can live, nothing can survive, nothing can thrive. There's no function. It's just nothing. And what God proceeds to do is bring order out of this chaos. This is shown physically. We have things like science, which work together to sustain physical life. But also spiritually as well, God brought his order in his law, in his commandments, in how we should live with one another harmoniously. God is a bringer of order from this chaos. God has made the world in a harmoniously and orderly way, right? Yet our experience of the world, and sometimes ourselves, can seem the complete opposite. As we know, we only need to read a few chapters further to realize this opposer, this Satan, came to lead us away from this harmony which was represented in this garden and began to bring chaos into the world, bringing chaos out of God's order. This is shown physically through things like diseases, injury, natural disasters, ultimately death. Spiritually as well, we were cut off from God, and spiritually we went into a sort of turmoil and became the worst that you see of humanity today. Satan seeks to bring chaos out of God's order, but God is a bringer of order out of chaos. And just a spoiler alert, because it has to be mentioned, God won that battle at the cross. So, what's this got to do with Revelation? Well, some people believe that the sea was where the origin of evil was, like the source of evil. Almost to the point of superstition, actually. People at the time of reading this might have generally feared being in the sea because they generally believed that somewhere at the bottom of all that was where actual evil came from. So when God is saying here, what he's saying here is basically that the sea being no more is representing this idea of this chaos being no more. We'll get back to that in a minute. There are other ways that this image of the sea can be being used in the Bible. In this passage. For example, in Isaiah 51, it talks about how God dried up the sea and made a way. He's referring to the parting of the Red Sea. What we have in this story is God taking his people from slavery, where they're not supposed to be, into the promised land, where they're supposed to be, and when there's a big barrier in the way called the Red Sea, and God made a way through it so they could pass. The barrier for us between God was sin and evil. And through Jesus' death on the cross, he made a way through for us. This passage is also talking about the barrier between us and God also being removed. It's saying it's not going to be there anymore. Other ways you can look at it, from what I found online, is we could call it political, but I don't really think there'll be politics in heaven, but we might on this side call it political, where sea often represented in that time division between nations. So the Israelites, when they were invaded by the Babylonians, for example, were invaded over the sea. And there's this idea of division. You got land, sea, land, enemies. And in heaven, in this new creation, there's going to be one unified nation with no division. So God is saying that division will be gone. The sea representing evil and the origin of it, the barrier between us and God because of sin. The division between nations will no longer exist. In this kingdom, the capacity to sin and the experience of it will no longer exist. God isn't taking us back to the Garden of Eden where he's presenting us with this choice. He's not saying, right, evil's going in the sea, stay away from that, don't do that, and you'll be fine. He's simply saying it won't be there. This is different to what we have now. This is different to what we had at the beginning. It'll just be gone. This choice is being represented to us through Jesus, and this is the result of that. Jesus on the tree was the second tree to choose from, the one that takes us back to where we were supposed to be. So it is a good thing to look at. It's all well and good thinking about the future, having no sin and having no evil, but that's, for our experiences, there's still a question mark, I think. Because it's all good looking forward and saying there will be no sin and pain going forward, but what about our pasts? If the first point is regards to the future, then we need to think about the past, because we wear the wounds of the impact of sin and evil already. Do we carry on living with that we've already endured forever too? The answer is no. Verse 4, he will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. Now, I used to wonder when I used to read this as a kid, like, why would I be crying on that day? Like, I've just seen Jesus. I'm in this new creation. I'm free. Both my knees will probably be working properly. That's going to be great. I can play football forever. It's going to be a good day. Why would you be wiping away tears? And it hit me hard when I was preparing this that this is much more personal, powerful, and applicable than I ever thought. Because God is saying he is going to wipe every tear we have ever shed or wanted to in our entire lives. Because he's referring to the former things being no more, thus the former things that we carry presently. I've got an illustration here to make a point, and please hear this just as an illustration, okay? I'm going to try painting a picture in your mind. If you find it easier to close your eyes to do that, that's absolutely fine. Imagine this new creation has arrived, okay? And Jesus is there with you, and he turns you around and he shows you your entire life before you, every second laid out like a piece of film, and he begins to walk with you through it. And with that, all the painful moments you have ever experienced. Maybe something comes to mind for you in when I mention that word. It could be that news from the doctor, the loss of a loved one. The possibilities are enormous. When that event happened, something latched onto you, didn't it? Something that you carried with you, maybe for the rest of your life. We became connected to this event through so many means. It could be something that caused anger and bitterness. It could be something that caused fear and anxiety, depression. We adopted lies because of what happened, like, I'm not good enough, I'm dirty, I'm weak, I'm not worthy. There are so many. Imagine Jesus walks through you, all those moments of tears shed, all those silent seconds you have battled and hurt that no one may ever know about. In this moment, imagine Jesus now standing with you, holds out his hands and says, whatever that is, you can give it to me now. You can give that to me. You don't have to carry it anymore. It doesn't belong to you now. And in this scenario, you are able to do so. He makes this possible. No matter how deep the pain goes, no matter how interwoven it has become in your identity, no matter how long it lasted, no matter how final it may seem, he says, give it to me, I can deal with it. This is not just for the things done to us, by the way, the tears we've shed. This is the stuff we've done, the tears we've caused, the guilt, the shame, the regret. Jesus says, give it to me. It's not yours anymore, it's mine. Let me have it. In doing this, you find yourself completely set free from it all. You're no longer connected to this event in your past. The lie is gone, the brokenness fixed, the years lost, restored. Imagine Jesus doing this for everything in every second, personally taking it all away from you. This is what he did at the cross. This passage is the future that he won for you. Now, this is just an illustration. There are two things which I think will differ in reality. One is, I don't think Jesus is going to make us relive or re-witness all these painful moments we've ever experienced in our lives. That sounds a bit mean. I can imagine this being quite instantaneous, but I've not died, so I can't really speak to what that's going to be like. But secondly is we don't have to wait for Jesus to return, for him to take on all our suffering and pain and guilt and shame. We don't have to wait to the end in order to give this to him. He did that 2,000 years ago, and he took it all. On the cross, it wasn't a sin antibacterial spray, 99.9% of all sin removed. No, Jesus drank the entire cup of the entirety of God's wrath, for the entirety of all sin and evil and the effects of it. It is done. Which means if you accepted Jesus' sacrifice on your behalf and put your trust in him, you can nail those things to the cross, that he took the consequences for all of it. So, there's a slight disparity beginning to form here, because I'm talking about something that's perfect and we're living in lives which are very far from. And this is the hardest point for me to talk about, because I felt extremely distant from the hope of this. I felt quite distant from the practicalities of this. But one really important thing to mention is that this isn't the now and not yet, basically, is what we're going to talk about. So I find it easy to look to the future of this new creation and find hope. And that in itself can be enough to keep you going sometimes. There's nothing wrong with that. Sometimes it can be like a holiday booked at the end of a very busy period of work. We kind of look to it and think, oh yeah, that's coming, that's great. There's nothing wrong with doing that, but if that's all you do, then we have gone slightly wrong. Because it's easy to see this passage as being something that is not here yet, because it sounds so much better than what we have now. But the problem with this is that you can fall into the trap of just checking off the days, waiting. If I told you God's kingdom is here now and in full, like it's all here, you would probably say, no, it isn't. Because you look at the news or the week you've just had, the former things which God's saying are going to be removed, they're still here. However, if I said to you that God's kingdom isn't here at all, it's all yet to come, then you might well say, well, why did God send his Holy Spirit for now then? Why do we pray and read the Bible? Why do we ask God to shape our lives now if we're just waiting for something that hasn't started yet? Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 13, verse 12, "For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I have been fully known." See, Jesus didn't die just to give us light at the end of a tunnel. He brought the light into the tunnel. Through his blood shed on the cross, his kingdom is bleeding into the world and transforming everything that encounters it. Although it is not here in full yet, we can see it in part now. Examples? Well, in regardless to sickness and injury, does God heal today? Yeah. In regards to oppression of any sort, does God deliver people from it today? Yeah. Does God set people free from addictions? Yes. And if you are a Christian, a follower of Christ, and you have been buried and raised with him, you are a new creation of this new creation coming. You are a citizen of heaven, of this new kingdom coming, but you are that now. So the answer to does God raise people from the dead is yes. Spiritually, yes. In fact, that might be the most common one from that list in this room. As for sin in our own lives and the choices made, God has given us his word to show us his design for how we should live, and his Spirit, who not only brings that word to life, but guides us and goes with us in our everyday. This Spirit is also the one responsible for the things mentioned earlier about healing. There's a guy in my dad's church who had a rough upbringing. Many do from that area in Wales. And he became a Christian, and he found himself struggling with anger. And it was just bubbling up on him and pouring over onto the people he loved. And he knew it wasn't of him, like it was something of his old self, but it was still dominating him. So they prayed for him. I think my dad actually was one of the ones who did pray for him. And when he was praying for him, he was filled with the Holy Spirit, and his mind went back to a particular event that happened, something that I imagine was linked to the anger. And in this situation, in this memory, the difference was he saw Jesus standing there this time with him. Jesus walks up to him, puts his hand on his heart, and when he does that, he feels this anger that had been dominating his life lose its control over him, set free. Now, does he never feel angry again? No, of course not. He's a human. We all do. But his control that it had over him was gone. That is what this kingdom looks like. We live in a world where we see that, like, both aspects at the same time. God working, the enemy working. There's like a tussle. But God's kingdom is the one that will prevail. When we say God's kingdom is here, it really is here. God restores things now. People like to think as earth now and heaven later as two very separate things, and they're not. They overlap and are connected in so many ways. God is building his kingdom now, and what he's building now is going to last. He's not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater. He's not going, when he removes all the evil and sin from this world and restores everything, the stuff that he's building now, the stuff that he said is good, is going to carry on. It's not a case of God's going to just refresh, restart everything. He's starting things now that we can experience now, that we can continue knowing forever. We're able to experience a piece of what this life in this kingdom is like now, even if it's only in part. If we want to see this kingdom in our own lives, we need to ask for it. We need to ask for it. Your kingdom come on earth as in heaven is part of the Lord's Prayer. Praying for healing and the setting free of afflictions. Pray for wisdom to make the choices that lead us closer to God. Don't sit around and wait for the kingdom to come and say, well, God's going to make everything good one day, so we'll just sit tight for the time being. We are vessels of spreading this kingdom and its impact. We are the hands and feet. God partners with us to share this light in what is a dark world and bring freedom now. We have a part to play in bringing this kingdom to completion. So to sit around and not take part and to not actively pray your kingdom come, this is disobedience in some ways, to use a harsh word, but God calls us to do this, so we should do it. Just a final image just to end with. I remember once when I was in Cape Town, and it was a winter's day, so it would be our summer. I was at this place called the V&A Waterfront. Lovely, lovely place. It's got restaurants and shops and all sorts, and it's right next to the harbour. And behind it, towering over it magnificently, is Table Mountain. I remember being on this day, and it was grey. It definitely wasn't wet, because it was a drought for the whole year, but it was definitely grey and miserable, and I kind of felt the same, to be honest. Towered down, flat. A few weeks later from that day, it was still cloudy and grey. I climbed said Table Mountain, and it started off on a day which was grey, but at some point, we climbed up through the clouds and made it to the top. I don't know if there's a picture slide next. There we go. It's a picture I took at the top. So that's the top of Table Mountain. Yeah, lovely. And one thing that God taught me, he brings me back to this picture quite a lot. Because it's the fact that no matter how grey it may be, how cloudy it is, above them all, the sun is always shining. It's always blue. That never changes. I remember God telling me about perspective, saying, look, no matter what your circumstances say that they can define about your life, I'm above it all. I never stop. Someday, it feels like there are no clouds. And it's just sunny and it's warm and it's blissful. Some days there are clouds and the sun kind of shines through and we can see a glimpse of it. Some days we can feel no sun. And I sometimes think that that's how we can see this kingdom sometimes. Some days it feels like it's just here. It's right now. If you've ever been to like Christian conferences before, you quite often get that sense. It's just God's here. It's present. It's now. Like evil be gone. Let's go. I am all in. Some days we find that it is cloudy and grey, but we see glimpses of the sunlight coming through. We see glimpses of what God is doing in life. Some days it feels like the sun doesn't even exist. Some days it feels like a massive thundercloud hanging over, and it's really dark and scary. That's probably more where I've been sat with in preparing this. And God is telling me a really important couple of things from this. It's important to remember two things, but if it wasn't there, if the sun wasn't there at all, it would make no difference how big the clouds were. You wouldn't be able to see anything, and you wouldn't be able to feel any warmth. In fact, you'd freeze to death. It's this idea that actually, even on a cloudy day, the fact that you can see that there is light, that there is some warmth, that there is the sun providing the necessary sort of energy for the plant life and everything, sustaining the world, is still there. If we allow ourselves to be defined by our feelings about how close God's kingdom is or isn't, we're basically saying that the sun is dependent on the cloud cover, which makes no sense. The fact of the matter is that even if you feel like God's kingdom is so far away, even if everything about you is telling you the world is dark and hopeless, it's really important to remember that actually while we are alive and have breath, while we are being sustained. God's kingdom is here. In fact, the very reason you can see the clouds and recognize them for what they are is because the sun is actually lighting them up. When we see the things in this world, if there was no God, if there was no purpose or plan to everything, then the chaos that we see in this world wouldn't be wrong, it would just be. There'd be no counterbalance. But we can look at the clouds and think, well, things are bad and things are wrong, and we know that they're wrong because there is a right, and we can see when evil is prevailing sometimes because we know that God exists. Actually, the light, the sun, can actually identify where things are wrong so we know where to pray. So the moral of the story to that is, don't let your feelings define God's reality. We live in a world where people both get sick and God heals. We live in a world where people bring hate and war, and God's bringing love and peace. Until the time of completion, until the time when Jesus returns, where all that will be gone and everything we're carrying will be removed, we live in a world where we see both. But God shows us his kingdom. He demonstrates his power and his love, not just because he loves us, but also as faith building to show us that I will intervene now to prove to you what I'm going to do as well. So when we see God's kingdom at work, it should fill us with faith, not just for what he's doing in the moment, but as a glimpse of where we're going and also what he's building. And remember, what he's building now is going to last. So even on a cold, dark day, remember, you can still see because the sun is shining, and you can still live and breathe because the sun is giving warmth, and God is sustaining you through all seasons. And one day there will be no darkness at all, no cloud cover. There is a light at the end of the tunnel, but that light is spreading through the tunnel. It's transforming it. It was not enough for God just to give us hope and then make us wait. He loves us too much for that. He loves you too much for that. This kingdom of heaven, this beautiful image, God says, come taste it now. That's all we get is a taste. We don't get the full meal, but we get the taste. And once you have the taste for it, you will never want to let go. You're going to want to follow that. If you are someone who has given their life to Jesus, you've made that response. But if you haven't made that decision yet, have a think. Because if anything that I've said this evening has made you feel, oh yes, from that description at the beginning, or you feel challenged by anything, come taste and see. So I mentioned Alpha just in a minute ago. It's a really good tool which has been used by the church to explain a lot of what the Christian faith is about. No questions are off the table. It's a perfect place for discussion. So I encourage you, if you've not made that decision, to do that. You can do that today. We'll have a time of response in just a minute where there will be people, prayer ministry teams, so you can chat to them and pray with them and, make your response. But if you're here today and you see this kingdom and you think, oh, I wish there are things in my life now which I know are going to be gone one day and I just wish they would be here now. Well, God's kingdom is here. We ask for his kingdom come. If there's any area in your life where you need to pray, God, your kingdom come, be that through healing or deliverance or for yourself or a friend or whatever it may be, there's going to be an opportunity to respond to do that now. I'm going to invite the band to come back up now. So just to summarize what I've said so far, in God's kingdom, there's going to be no more evil at all going forward. You're going to be free. The results of evil and all the pain that comes with it will be moved. You're not going to have to carry that into this eternal kingdom. You're going to be set free from the things that feel like you may not ever be set free from. Secondly, this news should fill us with hope, and that should move us into action, because what God is going to do, he started doing now, which means you can taste and see that the Lord is good. You don't have to wait. God does set people free now. He does heal people now. One day, everyone is going to be raised with him, but God is saving lives now. The barriers are gone. The access to God has been made. So we're going to have a chance now to respond to that with worship. So I will lead us in communion in just a bit. But if there's anything in you right now, you can identify that you don't want, it's in the new, something that in the new kingdom, in the new creation, is not going to be there, which you're carrying now. I encourage you to bring that forward. Ask God to show his power and his love, because he loves you. I'm going to pray, and then I'm going to hand over to the band. God, thank you so much for the power of this verse, these verses of Revelation. Thank you so much for the hope that it can bring. Lord, in a world where there are so many people wondering, is it going to be okay? You say that through you and through your blood, it's going to be okay. So much to the point that not even death can get in the way of this. Lord, you're saying to us that you are close and near to us. Lord, I thank you that your kingdom is here now, that we don't just have to hope that this is true and wait, but no, you've actually brought your kingdom now so we can know it now, taste and experience it now. That in itself builds up so much faith for what's to come. Lord, if we've fallen flat, if we've allowed the circumstances in our lives to dominate our view of your kingdom, if the darkness seems so overwhelming, Lord, I just pray that you will draw close to us, show us that your kingdom's here. And I just pray that the sunshine will pierce through the clouds, remove the clouds. I just pray, Lord, for where our faith feels weak in the area of hope, that you bring hope. And I thank you that even if life does feel like a dark tunnel, the light at the end is coming into the tunnel. The light's in the way now. Pray this in the name of the one who made all this possible, Jesus. Amen.